I just forgot to record this, so I think we're now recording. So that was a great speech, Vicki. You just to confess that you don't want to have any of your sins to confess. You want to recap, but
Well, no, I don't. That's the problem. I don't want to talk about sinning, and my failings and the places where I really goofed up, and then the need to either request forgiveness or grant forgiveness, or for however that goes. The vulnerability of it is tough in the world that I find myself currently living in. So
right. So who wants? I'm reading another book called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. So about the cognitive dissonance, where we can attribute the mistakes that other people made, but that couldn't relate to me. So I totally get that. So what else do you think Jesus was trying to get out of this sentence or this prayer, that Jesus was teaching this to the disciples when they asked, how should we pray? What is it there that we can learn from this, that Jesus might want to teach us about this prayer?
I'm thinking about the 70 times 7 passage, with Peter. How many, and, it's not a math lesson for sure. There's certainly, obviously forgiveness is not easy. That's kind of what I take from that.
Yeah, personal experience included. Forgiveness is not all that easy. Yeah, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Oh, Barbara, go ahead. Sorry. You're unmuting. You're still trying to unmute. We can't hear you yet.
I'm
Yeah.
pressing the space bar, but I guess it doesn't always work. I understand that the 70 times 7 does not actually mean 70 times 7. That term means infinity. So that when I realized that, I thought, oh no, gracious, that is really a lot. It's not just that I'm counting up until 70 times 7, and then after that I'm off the hook. That I have to keep doing it over and over and over again forever, for eternity. That really got my attention of what that means.
And it changes your behavior. If I can count, then I'm really happy to count your sins. But if there's not a, a finite number, I don't get to count your sins. So now I have to think about, uh-oh, game's up. I have to do something really different. Infinity, those numbers were holy numbers, and they were sacred numbers, and so I think that's where the infinity part comes in. So what about this part? God gives completely. What in your life has offended God? Uh-oh. Okay, Vicki, your turn. No. Vivian, are you trying to get in there?
I will.
Okay,
I unmuted myself. Trying to teach my great-granddaughter, I got a little bit extra what shall we say, grouchy. So I had never really appreciated my behavior in trying to teach her and get her to the bus when it was 2 minutes till she better leave, or she wouldn't make it to the bus. You know, you got a little bit loud with her to get her to move. And so those kinds of things I just never really appreciated myself for doing.
And boy, are those ever testing times, aren't they, for testing one's patience? Oh my Lord.
Right, right. Yeah.
So, and do you think that was something that God understood about your life and your frustrations with a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old or 11?
Well, hopefully he forgave me, but I would appreciate it if he hadn't had to.
Oh boy. Right. Yeah. So, and then ask and receive forgiveness, but consider the challenge of forgiving others. Um, yes, forgiveness, a one-off event.
How do you wrestle with the difference between forgiving and enabling? Where you may, I mean, forgiveness is one issue, but sometimes you can enable people by not holding them responsible for the things that they do as well. How do we struggle with those issues?
I wonder what God would say to us about enabling us.
That's a good point.
Because I'm a slow learner oftentimes. So how many times, I think God gives us as many chances as we want to get knocked up on the side of the head to get it right, you know?
Well, forgiving doesn't mean that you're saying it's okay. It doesn't mean that the behavior was all right just because I forgive you. The behavior's still bad. And that's what that helps move you away, that keeps you from the codependent place. But I can't do your behavior. You have to do your behaviors. And I have to do my behavior, which means I don't play the codependency game. But I mean, forgiveness, I guess, means I'm loved. Forgiveness means I get to experience grace, whether I'm giving it or receiving it. But, what has offended God is, well, let's see, I got up this morning. I felt good. And I remembered God for about 3 seconds. And then after that, I think I forgot. I think that's part of the offense, that I'm not having my awareness of God's presence in my life, and I forget about it. And I think about me and what I want and need.
What I've got to do, where I have to go next, yeah. And also, God seems to realize that we're not going to be, we're not going to not offend. That's what I get out of this. We're not going to be non-offenders. If we get a prayer that says, "Forgive us our sins, forgive us our debts," then we're not like, oh, is God going to wake up surprised that we made, we weren't perfect today?
And then it's that wonderful tension of, oh, well, good, God has forgiven me. Forget you. The other person, the place where I need to extend forgiveness. It's like expectation. I don't know, I'm expecting it for me, but am I willing to give it to the other? So
Right.
Well, and maybe some of the issue is in the definition of forgiveness. How do we define that? And I appreciated your comments, Vicki. I was thinking about, I worked a lot with drug addicts and alcoholics and, struggling with those kinds of issues.
Yeah. Is there a one-off? When I do mediations with two people, we talk about what went wrong and what could repair that. And then I always want to know, how can we make sure that this doesn't always repeat again and again? And so that's the part that I want to add in their mediation, so that they don't just repeat, offend, repeat, offend, repeat, offend. And so we try to build something in that's like accountability. If this happens again, then we'll seek out help, or we'll do something different.
So I got curious. I was looking at that 70 times 7 passage, because it's actually in Matthew 18. And I know there's some Matthew 18 folks here who've really worked with that passage a lot. I have some, but it has that part about if someone offends you, and you go with a brother or a sister, go with 2 or 3, or then the whole church. And then, because the version I have, Matthew 18:21, this is Peter. Lord, if another brother or sister or member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? So in other words, there's something there in terms of tying it into Matthew 18. So if any of you have ever, you've worked with that. I know you work with Matthew 18. So if you've got any reflections, I'd be glad to hear.
We stop at verse 20.
You never stop when it comes to context.
No, someone probably has thought this through.
In your note if you look down, it says, look, Matthew 18 verses 21 to 22. So I'm legal. I can ask the question.
Oh, right. Okay, darn it. Okay.
I like it.
Not that we're into legalism here.
I thought this was more than one passage where it said 70 times 7, but this one says 70. Yeah, this one says 77 times. I think there are other passages where it says 70 times 7. So it must appear in other Gospels, but it doesn't show it right away. So I would do a study of where it is in the other Gospels. Oh, Larry, go.
Gail, I'd like to share a forgiveness story. If I'm assuming my good wife will forgive me. Donna's dad and another lady that was a good friend of theirs, I don't know whether she was Polish or from Czechoslovakia or where, but living in the States. Donna's dad and this woman got in a big argument and did not want to forgive each other, so their good family relationships between these two families came to a halt. And Donna and I talked to her dad and mom about this and said, we sure wish that there could be forgiveness and you could move on then. And we were living in Illinois. We were called to come to Florida, where they were spending the winter, and her dad's heart was giving out. He was in the hospital. And it was very evident that he was in his final hours. And he said to us, I want you to call Margaret and ask her to forgive me.
Mm.
And so it was beautiful that this was his dying wish.
Wow.
that there be peace between the two.
Wow, that's powerful.
And so in a few days, Donna did call Margaret and talk with her. And she accepted the request from Donna's dad, and life moved on. But it was kind of like he wanted a clean plate when the good Lord said, "You are finished on this earth."
Wow, nothing like urgency to make you think about forgiveness, and that's quite a testimony.
It was beautiful.
The sad thing is that there are lots of families, lots and lots and lots of families who have these lack of forgiveness moments inside the family itself, and it can last for years and years. People carrying those rifts, forever. And we in the church have reconciliation processes and some tools if we could have people who wanted to come and use them. So I think in terms of what we offer the world, I think we certainly offer the world some great tools like you're just sharing, Larry. There's some great benefits of having to not go to your grave with this heaviness on your heart forever. I want to move us into this the Jewish translation here. And this is from Welcome to My World, Dennis Fishman, whose parents used to say that, and he's using Amy Jill Levine explaining the Lord's Prayer. So Amy says, someone want to read this paragraph and forgive us our debts? Someone want to read that out loud for us?
And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. This is a Jewish idea as well. We help those who are in economic distress, which would have been the only reason to take on debt in an agricultural economy. We believe that God will help us in our distress and keep us from paying all that we owe for our actions, whether they are sins, trespasses, or just falling short of the mark.
This one really, thank you, Vivian. This one really hits me hard. What do we, what do we owe people? Only in economic distress would we ever have a debt. And so that means that we were in destitute or desperate ways before we would have to take on a debt. And so what would cause us to fall into destitute, or to become destitute, or fall into desperate times? And I'm looking around us. Do we know anybody who's at risk? Yeah, it's a corona crisis at risk, and this is what's been on my heart. I'm sure that there are people who are not knowing what they're going to do when the eviction order is back in place at the end of December. So I was in a meeting this morning about Littleton and our neighborhood and what to do about those persons facing economic hardship. And their quote from the South Metro Housing option, it's a nonprofit that's working with housing the persons that are desperate. They're saying that when the eviction is lifted at the end of the year, just in Colorado, will have 300,000 evictions that will come back into play. So I can't imagine what that's going to do to our economy or our state. 95,000 in Arapahoe County, in just one county, 95,000. So how do we think about our debts and our debtors? This is what I think the Jewish thing was talking about. People are desperate.
Well, forgiveness is surely about grace, right? I mean, if if we do talk about, we sure want God to be grace, give grace to each one of us, right? And somehow I got to think this Matthew 18 thing is kind of hitting me, and partly because of Fred, your comments. Do you enable people if you forgive too often? So I guess two things. One, seems like forgiveness. If I forgive someone, and then Peter says, well, how many times do I forgive? I mean, that's something kind of internal. I mean, that's something I do. I'm giving forgiveness. I don't think that means I go to that person 77 times. I think that Peter's recognizing, gosh, tomorrow I'm going to wake up feeling like I was wronged again, and so I need to extend that. I mean, that's one way for me to think about it. And with your comments, Fred, I mean, given that passage is with Matthew 18, there's got to be some connection, because it does say if people refuse, you should treat them as a tax collector or a Gentile. I mean, so in other words, there's some responsibility on the person being forgiven in their response. Now, I don't know how to work all that out, but I kind of see both of those, and so, there's something not very, this is not like a ledger and an accountant kind of thing going on. So I don't know what to.
That's what I was going to say. When you think about this, particularly if you're thinking about this as an economic thing, this does not fit in our world. There is nothing in the way our society functions around money and finances and property that resonates with this. And I'm gonna jump out of this, but since you brought it up, Dave, the treat, if they don't behave, then treat them like Pharisees and whoever else it is. John Paul Lederach wrote, I think it was he, wrote something saying, how did Jesus actually treat the tax collectors and the Pharisees? What did Jesus do with tax collectors and Pharisees? He connected to them. He went to their house for dinner. He stayed in relationship with them. And that, when I read that, that was like, bing, bing in my head. And so that just resonated for me as something that an interpretation I could live with. I think that interpretation fits right here. The other thing that comes to mind, and I can't do you, David and Lyle, you'll have to fix this, but the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible version of the year of Jubilee, you go through everything, you set everything, and then every 50 years, you blow it up. And you say, okay, forget all that. We are starting fresh. We are starting over. And that makes sense to me too. We need a year of Jubilee.
True. One of the things that I've wondered is if the forgiveness thing, if that isn't for me, to help me free myself and my conscience, that doesn't mean that the other person isn't still responsible for their behaviors any more than God forgiving me is a wonderful thing. But I've still got the problem of dealing with the things that I've done wrong. and I've still got to figure out some way to put that together, even though I'm forgiven.
Right. Very, very good point. And so it's not God's job to have you straighten up and fly right. That's your job, right?
Well, and also, your point about Jesus eating with the tax collector kept a relationship, but he also confronted. It's like Zacchaeus. Doesn't he give twice or four times or whatever it is, what he defrauded? So, yeah, it's not cheap grace, but it is oriented towards staying in relationship, right? That's one of the toughest things right now in terms of, I'm sorry to get on this, but the Church of the Brethren and these splits, because we're severing relationship, and which I think is just cheapening something that's really, really important, not just because I feel good about it, but historically in terms of the Brethren tradition. It's just really sad that that's happening when there's so many things that we could be doing together. Boy, forgiveness around that's an interesting issue.
And I agree, and you're not alone. Or we're not alone as Church of the Brethren. There are many faiths are struggling with the same issues right now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
So when we had the year of Jubilee, I believe that everyone was supposed to be given their vine and their fig tree so that everyone could have olive oil and everyone could have farming. And so you were able to economically sustain yourself. And then I'm thinking of after the Civil War, everybody was given 40 acres and a mule, except it got taken back. And so that was, our best, I think that was our best attempt to be the kingdom here on earth. And then we blew it. We just went backwards.
Well, African Americans never got the mule. That's part of the history. Yeah, I don't have them right at my fingertips. There are some really good resources in terms of Jubilee and how to make that work in this world kind of thing. It's certainly not about capitalism or communism or socialism. That's for sure.
And that's,
it's something radically different.
and if anybody's looking, I think that's in the book of,
It's in Leviticus, I think.
Leviticus?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And then maybe a book. I know some of you know a book called The Upside Down Kingdom. That I'm pretty sure there's material in that book, although I'm not going to say that for sure. That's Donald Crable is the author of that.
The other thing about relationship and behavior and forgiveness, I think restorative practices are right on to that in terms of the effort to make things right, to repair the harm, to fix what got broken. And I think that's an essential part of the responsibility, the no longer codependent, the growing everybody up into right relationship with each other and with God.
So I'm just so excited to share with you my favorite passage. So I'm going to just skip to this final reading. This is from the book. See if I can show this if I'm on the screen here. When the Powers Fall by Walter Wink. Walter Wink is a what is his Lutheran? He's at Auburn Theological Seminary. He's passed away, but he's gotten the passages about loving your enemy and got it really so that it makes sense to people. And this is the short version of all his work that makes it really easy to understand. But he talks about this Lord's Prayer section, and I'll just read the first paragraph. This is talking about how I free myself up. 1988, I led a workshop on nonviolence with a group of South African church leaders, half of them Black. Every Black person there had been tortured, and all had forgiven their torturers. One reason they might have done so is admittedly pragmatic. Hatred destroys the soul, and no matter how deserving of revenge the enemy may be, to continue to carry the desire for vengeance is simply to roast in your own fire. Forgiveness lifted a huge burden off their souls. It freed them from the crushing weight of a rage that could destroy them. For their own sakes, they needed to forgive so that their souls could soar free of the power of the past to consume them. There's a typo. Beyond the power of the torturer to continue to dominate their minds. Does someone want to read the next paragraph?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
That, however, is not the way of any of them described the process they underwent. The summons to forgive came, as it were, from outside of them, as a command of the gospel that they should not avoid. Much as they wanted to hold on to the desire for sweet revenge, they felt constrained by their commitment to the gospel to forgive. They could not forgive because they saw forgiveness as their fundamental obligation to God. They forgave not for their own sakes, but for the sake of the other. They had to forgive the torturers because God had already done so and was calling them to do the same. As the Sermon on the Mount puts it, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Not so that you can sleep better at night, or to avoid an ulcer, or to achieve peace of mind, but so that you may be children of your heavenly parent. The incentive is the imitation of God. If we want to be like God, then we must act the way God acts. God forgives us, so we must forgive others.
Phew. So I can't tell you how much this has impacted my life. And I've even had to share this with other people in my congregation who are struggling with how can they possibly forgive this injustice that has happened. And it's impacted other people in the local church as well. Every Black person had been tortured, and everyone had forgiven their torturers. That is unbelievable to me. Has anybody been taught this kind of forgiveness, this kind of pathway of why they would want to be engaging in forgiveness? Is this new to anybody else, or a new thought?
I don't know if it's new, but so isn't this in the context of reconciliation commissions stuff?
Well, it would be before the Truth and Reconciliation happened, but I think it was in 1988. So that was before that. I think that was before that actually had happened in the country.
That was sort of the model that they were developing, that they used in South Africa, that they wanted everyone who had committed some kind of injustice to confess, but they were not punished. But they were invited to come forth and share explicitly what they had done.
For their own sakes as well as everyone else, I think.
Right. But that, I mean, I have a personal question about that because I'm still carrying something that someone had done repeatedly against me, privately and in public, repeatedly, and has not acknowledged that or apologized in any true sense or said that she would change her behavior. So while I am most of the time very willing to forgive somebody who confesses, that I can coach myself to do that, whether I want to do it or not. I think that's the right thing to do. But this is somebody who has never confessed. So I'm still stuck on that. And I'm stuck on it because Father Michael Lapsley from South Africa, whom I met at Cormila, where Gail and I had been there, but this is on a trip where you weren't there, Gail. I don't think you were there on that trip. I spent 4 days on a workshop with him, and he had been bombed in his home while he was reading his mail that blew off the roof of his house, but blew off his hands and one eye. And he said that he's a Episcopal priest, I guess is the right term. And he understands the gospel to say that when the person comes to his front door and confesses and asks for forgiveness, then he is prepared to sit down with that person and have a conversation and then ultimately to forgive. But he wouldn't do that in advance. So that's, in a way, confirms how I sort of understand the situation with this person in my life. So I'm wondering, do any of you think that there's value in the other person to acknowledge the injustice, the harm done? And with all the RJ restorative justice stuff, I think that's foundational.
And it's also not always on the table. You know, not everybody will come to the table and be a part of reconciliation. So then you have to look at what are my options.
I mean, if you follow me around with the videotape, you would observe me treating this person very respectfully and including the person in conversations or whatever and in work. But I'm not prepared to directly forgive the person until there's acknowledgement.
So the question is, who's in control of what? And as long as you are waiting for the other person to do something, you're caught, most likely. And so it's, how do you get freed up? And it's both of these things. There's, I mean, of the two paragraphs, there's the you do it for yourself so that you don't have this crushing weight, and it lets you soar free. And there's also the other side of that, of how do you imitate God? What's Jesus gonna do? You know, how do you walk in those, you, me, anybody, you know, walk in those steps? And what they always say about forgiveness is, don't forgive until you are ready. Don't make anybody make you do anything. It's got to be when you do it, how you do it, what it means to you. And it may or may not, yeah, I mean, it's like, how do you gain control of all of that for yourself? Does that make any sense? I don't know.
Well, you know, there's that, I think all of us have probably heard the phrase forgive and forget. I don't think that's in the Bible that I know of anywhere. You know, even God does not forget. I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, I preached a few months ago about the passage where Peter, you know, Jesus says, feed my sheep 3 times. He doesn't say directly, Peter, you know, you
Denied me.
Denied me 3 times, but it's pretty clear that that's probably at least, I mean, Peter knows that, but, you know, so you know, the forgetting thing is not necessarily, I don't think you ever, how can you forget what's part of your life? I mean, whatever it, and it could be simple things, but obvious, I think about, I know some of you know who Marie Fortune is, and the sexual issues in terms of abuse.
In the
I mean,
church.
people don't forget that stuff, and they shouldn't. I don't know. I don't know if you can, or PTSD or war, all those kinds. But there is a possibility of forgiving, and that has something to do more with you than the other person, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know.
So Barbara, I was there when Michael Lapsley was there, and I remember his
Oh.
talk very much. I think I have his book that he wrote, and one of the things that he said was that where are the reparations? And it's like, is someone going to help me get dressed in the morning when I travel to Northern Ireland because I don't have two hands to button my shirt or to do those things, and so then it became how is this going to be made right? And I thought that was a very good point. How does he get any kind of reparations out of what horrible thing that was done to him?
Right. That was part of my question about Walter Wink's thing, Truth and Reconciliation. I mean, I don't know a lot of the details, but my sense is that there were reparations as part of that process. Some of you know that better in terms of
Not
South
really.
Africa.
Not really.
No, they didn't.
Is that right?
They didn't require that. And that's why the Irish and other places are saying they don't want to make the same mistake as South Africa. They want to take longer to decide what to do and how to do it. Also in this country.
Yeah, I was going to say that's very interesting in terms of racism and our whole reparations discussion that's going on here in some places.
I mean,
Plenty of folks who are saying, well, I didn't enslave anybody, so there's no reason I need to be concerned about this. You need to, which is basically saying get over it, isn't it?
Right.
the other part is some harms are so great. Losing your hands, just being dead, being killed. You can never get fair trade for that, fair reparation for that. There's not a quid pro quo. The Truth and Reconciliation Commissions were really based on just truth telling. People just wanted to know what happened. And also just that whole confessional thing of here's what I did. Here's what it looked like. Here's what it felt like. And it's the narrative, it's the storytelling, the truth telling that is wonderfully meaningful, but it doesn't necessarily make things right in the sense of I've done full reparation for the terrible things that I've done. But it does allow people to move forward. And David, you're right, you don't forget, but it's like, what is controlling me and my life? And where's my personal power? Where's my personal authority? And it's claiming that.
Well, and in Barbara, your story, what's missing is that person hasn't acknowledged that there's been a wrong. And so
Right.
That's what's hard. God, I don't know. Some of that when the acknowledgement isn't there, then we continue to forgive, I guess, but we don't forget.
And there is no guarantee this person is ever going to say anything more to you.
Right.
Ever. They may go to their grave without one peep.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that infinity thing, and I think in my own personal life, that's what keeps resurfacing is I have to forgive that person or that situation again because it will raise its head, and then it's like, okay, I have to choose what I'm going to do with that. And so it may not be that they offend. I mean, that's even worse if they keep offending, but to have to realize that, that's on me. I get to do the infinity thing. And
I wonder if this would help, because God forgives us, and I'm sure we do things against God that we never realized we do, and yet he forgives us. And we don't know to ask God to forgive us on the things we didn't know we did wrong. But yet God forgives us. And maybe that would help us forgive other people who offend us but don't ever want to give in. I've got a brother like that. I don't know if he's still there anymore because he's 94, I think. But he always wanted to hang on to his things against me, and after a while you can say, okay, I've asked for forgiveness, and now it's up to him to do it. But there's not much more I can do that I can figure out.
and yeah, thankfully God doesn't keep track and have a counting, a ledger either, right? Right.
I hope he forgives me when I do things that I don't realize I'm doing wrong.
Right. So so debts can mean a lot of things, but sins is one of the things that brings a whole nother different layer to this. And so and then it says we we choose the word sin for a different nuance than the one that he used. So forgive us our trespasses, forgive you, and do not forgive their trespasses. Neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Um, so so we have economic, and I think what I was getting at earlier is that we have individual sins, and then we also have corporate sins for which we may not even be aware. And so those things that we have debts, we're going to need God's forgiveness for things that are bigger than just my relationship with my brother or my sister. And we're talking about the things that might be in our raising their heads now, the economic injustice, the people being killed on the street, the racism that we may not even know exists and people have been trying to struggle with and overcome and try to forgive. So maybe there's a lot of things that this prayer really could have something to say to us as we go about today, not just last year.
So this is sort of confessional. I don't know if you can see behind me. Okay, so we have been working on remodeling. We were hanging pictures. We got some nice stuff up, and way over here it's a tile sun. It's made of ceramic tiles. And my husband and I had a big argument over that and hanging it and where did it belong. And it's not in the right place. And I wanted it one spot and he wanted it another, and it's just in the space that it's in. And I just left it there intentionally as a reminder to say, look, this is what you get, an off kilter picture. It's not hung in the right spot. You had a big fight over it. Just be humble and remember these things, and and go cautiously, go humbly, go. You don't have a whole lot to brag about.
We can all fall short of the glory of God. Is that what you're saying? Oh boy. Well, I think we're about come to our time slot. Is there something, a last final hurrah here? Anybody have any input? We've got to work on the year of Jubilee, and now we've got to forgive everybody. We got a lot of work to do, folks. and and thankfully there's a God who gives us this this role model of, how could I possibly walk this path if I didn't have a God that was already doing that and showing me how to walk that very difficult path in front of me. So I think maybe we could say the Lord's Prayer as we end, and you can say debts or sins or trespasses or whatever you want. Our Father who art in
Art in
heaven,
heaven,
hallowed
hallowed
be
be thy
thy
name.
name. Thy
Thy
kingdom
kingdom come,
thy will
thy
be
will be
done
done
on
on
earth
earth
as
as
it
it
is
is in
in
heaven.
heaven. Give us this
This
day
This day
our
our
daily bread,
daily bread,
and
and
forgive
forgive
us
us
our
our
debts
debts
as
as
we
we forgive
forgive
our
our
debtors.
debtors. And lead us
And lead us
not
not into
into
temptation,
temptation, but
but
deliver
deliver
us
us from
from
evil.
evil. For thine
For
is
thine is
the
the kingdom,
kingdom and the
the
power
power,
and
and
the
the
glory
glory forever.
forever.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'll stop recording.